Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Joining us on various social media channels as we live broadcast this interview with our special guest, Professor Zukiswa Zingela. Our conversation today will be about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on frontline healthcare workers. We want to, try and create awareness about, the mental stress that many have to go through as a result of this pandemic. Now, our guest, like I have just said, is Professor Zukiswa Zingela. She's still trying to connect with us. I hope she will successfully connect with us because she is based in Umtata, my hometown, and I'm not sure how strong is connectivity in that part of the world. But I'm crossing fingers that she comes through so that we can have our conversation. But a little bit about Professor Zingela. She comes from Port Elizabeth. She did her medicine undergraduate degree, MPCHB, at the University of Natal, now called UKZN. She later qualified as a specialist psychiatrist, where she obtained a fellowship from the College of Medicine of South Africa. She worked for many years in the United Kingdom, working in the National Health System in the UK, in Lancashire Care, Foundation Trust. She then decided, she wanted to come back home and plow back here at home. And so she continued working then as a private psychiatrist in the greater PE area, where she was doing very well as a private psychiatrist, assisting, a lot of people in that part of the world. But she was then beaten by an academic bug. And she decided that as much as she was doing okay in the private practice, but maybe she had a bigger calling to actually come and strengthen the public healthcare system, because in that part of the world, there's very few psychiatrists, more especially in the more rural side of the Eastern Cape. And so she left her private practice to join the public, healthcare system. And, as a result of that, she actually was given a new role as the head of department of the psychiatry, department at the Walter Sisulu University. All right, so she is the head of department of psychiatry at the Walter Sisulu, University, the medical school there. To date, ever since she took over there, she has trained and produced many young psychiatrists in her attempts to make sure that there are a lot of psychiatrists. Like I've mentioned, that there's a serious shortage of psychiatrists in the Eastern Cape, especially the former Transkei area of the Eastern Cape that has got more than 3 million people, who were not getting access to psychiatry services in the way that is expected. She has been very, very proactive in how she does things at the university. She has been collaborating with other universities locally and also internationally, even as far as universities that are across the Atlantic. There she is. She has just joined us. You can't hear, as she's just joined us. She's just got some challenges with the audio. I think she needs to correct that so that we can be able to talk to her. Professor Zingela, can you hear me? Prof, can you hear me?
Now I can hear you. Can you hear me?
All right. Oh, thank you very much for joining us. I was just telling people about you, all the good things that you have done. But let me recap so that they can put the face to this person who has done all these magical things. I've mentioned that you are a specialist psychiatrist with a fellowship from the College of Medicine of South Africa. Yes. I've mentioned that you have worked in the UK under the National Health System for a long time, but you decided to come back home and plow back to your country. I've mentioned that you've spent time in private practice where you were doing quite well in the greater PE area. However, the academic bug and your need to actually produce more psychiatrists saw you taking up a position as the head of psychiatry at the Walter Sisulu University. And to date, since you took over, you've trained and produced quite a number of specialist psychiatrists alleviating the big shortage of psychiatrists in that part of the world. You also have looked at collaborating with other universities locally and also, in the US. I've seen you running programs in collaboration with Harvard, as part of trying to make sure that you empower, the people that you are training. You have researched and published quite a number of papers on relevant research to our situation in South Africa, and may you continue to do so. So, Prof. Zingela, welcome to Dr. Fundi Health Digital Platform.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for that illustrious introduction.
Yeah, so Doc, today we are going to be talking about issues of mental health with specific reference to essential healthcare workers, the frontline essential healthcare workers. So that's the focus of our discussion today. And so as we get into that, before we do that, I would like you to just tell us briefly, what is your role? Yes, you are the HOD of the Department of Psychiatry, but can you just tell us a little bit about your role within the university and the academic hospital there?
Okay, I think because our focus is on a clinical condition that presents within the clinical sector, I am going to then refocus us on my role as the head of department, the head of clinical, head of a clinical department at Nelson Mandela Central Hospital. And the reason I'm saying that is because the work I'm doing combines the academic aspect, which I then do under WUSU, but it also combines the clinical aspect, which is more service-orientated, while at the same time educating health professionals. So this initiative that we are going to be talking about is something that we have launched with support from the Nelson Mandela Central Hospital. All the heads of departments there are very supportive of this program because they feel that it is required. In addition, we've also launched it with support from the current CEO and the clinical manager at Nelson Mandela Central Hospital. In addition, we also managed to launch it in one of our mental health units in Port Elizabeth, and that is the Dora Nginza Mental Health Unit, where they are actually undertaking similar training after I've trained the trainers.
All right. All right, just before we get deeper into that solution that you are busy rolling out in the Eastern Cape, just to create a context for our viewers, Doc, caring professions, doctors, nurses, psychologists, they tend to experience a lot of stress in the workplace. Can you just tell us why? In one of the articles that I read, they said the medical professionals, they actually exhibit a lot of, they have a lot of stress in relation to their work, because I want us to talk about before COVID, the normal situation that happens before COVID. Then we talk about, the situation right now, and then we bring in the program that you are running.
Sure, thank you so much. I think the stark reality is that all health workers, doesn't matter whether they are based in South Africa, in Australia, in the US, in the UK, all health workers do experience high levels of occupational related stress. And as a result, you will find whatever profession you look at within the health worker sector, you will generally find that they have high levels of stress, high levels of anxiety, high levels of depression. And unfortunately, that often is linked with high levels of suicide. We ourselves in South Africa have got a number of examples of colleagues who have ended up taking their own lives. And if you look at the underlying profession, you'll find that it's a doctor who often would be looking very successful to those from the outside, and you would be thinking, this doctor has no reason to kill himself. And that is because the medical profession, and I'm focusing on the medical profession mainly because I'm a doctor, the medical profession is under extreme stress. And there's a number of reasons that have been studied to look at why. But part of the problem we face at the moment is wherever we're working, there is a constant contradiction between what you take an oath to do and what your resources allow you to do.
Yes.
Which means, in a sense, as you do your job, there is a degree of frustration and helplessness that creeps into your job to the point where suddenly it gets too much. And when I say suddenly, I mean we continue taking that pressure for a very long time before we back up. And when we do, you'll find then that it's very difficult for the average doctor to cope. And we turn to all sorts of coping mechanisms which don't necessarily support us. And sometimes when we see no hope, when we see no help, we then end up killing ourselves. So I agree with health professionals under a remarkable level of strength. You then take into context or into consideration what is currently happening with the COVID-19 outbreak, and then you get a recipe for disaster unless we keep an eye on keeping our health workers mentally stable.
Yes. You know, what you've just shared now is something that I also picked up on. There was a study done by the Medscape in the US where they actually listed, you know, the work that doctors do and other issues like, you know, relationships and issues around finances, you know, the bureaucracy within the systems where people are working as some of the contributing factors, you know, to them having high levels of stress. Now, as we are now focusing on COVID-19, the pandemic, we have a bit of experience from what happened in China and in other countries before it came to South Africa. What picture are we seeing from the other countries before we zoom in into South Africa?
Well, if you look at the pandemic itself, it's obvious that if you are not at the epicenter of the pandemic, you are one of those observing from the outside looking in. And what we have been observing, obviously, are rising numbers, which look scary in terms of, you know, the size of the problem. It's rising numbers of infection, rising numbers of death, rising numbers of health professionals who are affected by the infection, who also end up losing their lives. So if you then look at the picture that we're looking at, even if there is hope that in the end we're actually going to get this outbreak under control, at the moment, a number of countries which have been affected have still not really won the battle, which therefore affects how we perceive the problem. It also affects how we are going to feel about the problem. It also affects how we think about the problem and what reactions we then get. Because it's quite normal to feel anxious, to feel scared, to feel that we're not going to be able to cope, because the enormity or the size of the problem looks so huge from the other countries. You then refocus on South Africa and you look at the fact that we also started off with small numbers. In the beginning, not many people actually believed that we were susceptible to it. There were all sorts of myths about who is susceptible to it and who's not. But over the last few weeks, we've seen a gradual increase in numbers to the point where we've ended up with a lockdown, which also brings its own effect on our mental health. So if you look at the pandemic across the world and then you look at it in South Africa, what we have been watching happening to other countries has finally arrived at our doorstep. And of course, we have more than enough time to, you know, generate those negative feelings of anxiety, feeling scared, fearful. We now have to cope with it. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, how will we make sure that we are able to address with this outbreak and actually survive it?
Yeah. So, I mean, the information that is coming out, you know, from places like Italy, where a number of doctors, you know, are passing, you know, I would say they're dying, you know, because they have contracted this, you know, infection in the workplace. And in, you know, what was, you know, seeing also in the US, it's not helping, but also South Africa is not immune as well. We already have lost at least one, you know, professor for a COVID-19 related, you know, a type of illness. So the reality is now here in South Africa. And so what are you observing as you are doing your work, have you observed any changes in the behavior of the healthcare workers that you are working with in the hospital? Are there any signs of anxiety? Is there any change in behavior? Is there any frustration? What are you observing?
Okay, I think, that question you're asking is very relevant because that's actually what pushed myself and the team to eventually come up with the program. Because as I said, we had lots of time and opportunity to observe the other countries as it was happening to them. And already we were starting to have our own negative feelings. So the closer it came to home, the more restless and anxious or scared people looked. Until the one morning when we woke up to the news that we had our peace. And the first thing one picked up at that stage was a state of fear and panic, which seemed to make people unable to actually shake out of that state enough to have a contingency plan. It is not to say we were not planning for the actual eventuality. We had a number of plans about how to cope with the medical emergencies or the medical burden that is actually going to increase as a result of the COVID-19 outbreak. What I'm referring to is the fact that in all of that preparation, I think most of us missed the opportunity to say, yes, we are prepared in terms of what we are supposed to be doing medically, but are we mentally and psychologically prepared to actually take? And that's literally what our focus is at.
So that was the trigger for you to say something needs to be done and must be done fast.
Yes, very correct. So I was feeling that whatever we have been doing is actually really preparing us well in terms of planning for the infection itself. But there was this sort of blind spot about the mental repercussions or psychological repercussions and whether we're actually ready to address them and whether we're actually able to plan for fortifying ourselves psychologically and mentally to deal with the problem.
Yes. So what then, informed you, as you were trying to, design a solution? What did you do? Did you have to go for a off-the-shelf solution somewhere, to come and plug it in the Eastern Cape? Or did you actually have to go and do a lot of research and see what would work in the Eastern Cape? So how did you go about in trying to then saying, I need to put up something?
Yes, thank you for that question. So the first question I asked myself is, if one is facing a crisis like this, is there any work out there that's already been done to say, in the face of a coming pandemic, how do the health workers prepare themselves psychologically and mentally? And what I found is that, unfortunately, there isn't much specific research that's focused on that, especially there isn't much research that's specifically focused on that within our context in South Africa. And when I'm talking about context, I mean in terms of our limited resources. In the Eastern Cape, there's only a specific number of health professionals, a specific number of mental health trained professionals. So in that instance, it meant whatever it is I was thinking of doing must be something that is, deliverable to more than one person at a time. And it is deliverable by skilled professionals, with the people at the front lines being able to come in, tap into the expertise, walk away feeling more mentally fortified. So in looking around for what was available, I eventually managed to find some work that has been done on psychological preparedness, specifically for disasters. But this is for natural disasters, for example, tornadoes, cyclones. So if you think about it, our technology has enabled us to be able to predict if it's going to hit a specific place. And the work that has been done is in preparing communities who are then facing that potential disaster in how to prepare psychologically and mentally to make sure that when the disaster comes, they at least are ready to cope with it. So I can also share that there were quite a few articles, maybe about 4 or 5, which were really useful, which enabled me to gather more information about that. But in addition, I also got very helpful information from our research partners in Harvard, who shared a link about how to care for your mental well-being during the lockdown and during the outbreak. And lastly, I also received some very helpful communique from one of our collaborative partners in research, Prof. Dan Stein, who is the head of department at UCT. And I was able to combine all of that information to then look at what we can do practically. And what then evolved was a mixture of taking my team into confidence, saying, listen, we will be required to actually support, our frontline workers, but we will not have the capacity to support each one individually. So what we need to do is we need to be proactive. We need to come up with a program that we can then make available to them to try and see if we can get them more prepared for what is coming, so that if we then get a surge in numbers, we've got a team that is mentally prepared to deal with that. Through, I think, just trying 1 or 2 things, I was then able to come up with a reasonable 1-hour program, which focuses on the practicalities of what your challenges are anticipated to be and how you can approach, solutions to those challenges, how you can calm yourself when you're faced with a crisis, and what, types of helpful feelings, thoughts, and behaviors will help you cope with a crisis. So after a lot of discussions between myself and Rob Stephen van Beek, who is my deputy in the department, we were able to then come up with a concrete program that we have now started applying since about a week or so ago. And so far, we've managed to train about 50 of our health workers who are in the front line. And how we've done it is we've done it in collaboration with our team in Port Elizabeth, where they take some of the health workers who are working in the Dora Ginza hospital unit, and we take some of the frontline workers who are working in Mthatha. And through doing that, we have managed to actually reach quite a number of people, much more than we would have been had we been doing this on an individual basis. And basically, the principle is group intervention, group training, which is very interactive and allows the health workers at the front line to learn as they interact and practice what we teach. I'm not sure if we're still connected.
Hey, Doc.
Let's see, I can hear you, but I'm trying to see if we can see each other again.
Okay, sorry, man, about that. Sorry.
No, don't worry. We were still
Yeah.
talking, but I'm not sure when we got cut off.
All right, let's go back. Apologies for the technology challenges. Sometimes these things, they happen unexpected. You have a plan B and a plan C to make sure that there is no trouble, but somehow things just happen. Sincere apologies for that break in the transmission, but we have our guest, Prof. Zukiswa Zingela, back online. And so, Doc, you were still telling us about what triggered you to actually decide that something needs to be done. And you were still telling us that there is no off-the-shelf type of solution from elsewhere in the world. And so you had to start by doing something. So can you just take us through there?
Yeah, no, we had to design our own, basically. And the main reason we had to design our own is it had to suit our resources, which were limited. It also had to suit our ability to access healthcare workers and also to suit the length of time we would have them available. Because remember, in the background of what we want to do is the fact that all healthcare workers have to prepare to be able to do something in terms of screening, in terms of testing, in terms of treating people who present with COVID-19 disease.
Yes.
Or rather COVID-19. So what we then had to do from our side is to say, can it be relatively fast? And the answer was yes, we could deliver it over an hour. Can it be basic enough to be applied across doctors, nurses, cleaners, GAs? Yes, because we were able to adopt, I would say in practical solutions to the challenge of training, which have been tried and tested in many ways. So we decided to focus on an element of psychological first aid combined with some cognitive behavioral therapy techniques. So although we were clear that this is not therapy, we were clear that this is training, but what we needed in order to be able to deliver the training was those psychotherapeutic skills borrowed from the School of Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. Yes. And then in addition, the last thing we needed to be able to do was we needed to be able, or let me put it to you like this, since the idea came in from me, I needed to be able to explain it to the team. I needed to be able to convey it in a manner that gets the team on board. But lastly, I also needed to design a way of training the team very fast in a way that they would quickly pick up the skills and we could kick off. So we piloted it a week ago, starting, I would say, last week on Tuesday. And since then, as I mentioned, we've managed to train more than 50 health workers. And what is positive is, despite the fact that this is, a program that we had to self-generate, we felt it was important for us to have an objective means of assessing it to see if it's working. So as we deliver the training, we have an audit tool that we use to see whether this is actually effective or not.
So and before the training and after the training type of tool?
Yes, exactly. To actually give us an idea whether it's effective or not. And quite frankly, just looking at the feedback we've received using the objective assessment, it's actually been very positive. But more importantly for me, it's the fact that when we finish training, we have had on occasion people who have attended the training. It could be people who are GAs, it could be nurses, it could even be doctors. Some of them have actually waited for us to collect our stuff just so they can come back to us and say thank you. I feel now I'm much more prepared to address this, even with the shortage of resources. So for us, I think that has been the most rewarding, when people who have attended it have already come back to us and said it's made a world of difference. So even though I know that there are all of these scary thoughts, but at least now I know how to approach them, I know what to do.
Yes. Now, in terms of scalability, Doc, because obviously, I mean, it was important that you pilot this thing, you roll it out within a smaller group of people. You have now gone up to about 50, but the need is so much more. So what plans are you guys having to actually scale up and train more essential healthcare workers to have that mental, resilience as they face the potential, challenges of the high stress levels relating to the COVID-19?
I think that is actually a very relevant and important question you're asking. And obviously from my side, being an academic and also being involved in research, the first step for me was to actually be able to say, yes, we're doing it because we've identified it, but does it work? And the numbers that we are talking about are still relatively small. But for me, the most important thing is at the clinical phase, the people who have received the training have said it makes a difference to how they actually approach the whole thing. And the next step was to then expand it from Mthatha to Port Elizabeth. And what we're hearing is that the team there, I actually happened to be with them yesterday. The team there has also been very quickly able to train a significant number. So what I now want to do is, with the team working together, meaning the team in PE and the team in Mthatha, we will need to review. We've got a date to try and review the next week. And what we want to do is we want to see, of the training element that we've offered, is there anything that we can make portable to the point where it can actually become an online resource? And the reason we actually want to do that is because, as you say, as much as we can reach the people across the Eastern Cape to some degree, especially in the public sector, by having these teams at these key strategic points, one cannot necessarily reach everybody who actually would like to be part of this. So the ideal for us is if in another week or two we're able to streamline it to the point where one can actually make this resource accessible online. At the moment, we are available mainly for the public sector. And the reason we're saying the public sector is because people who work in the public sector have got this label of being an essential worker. Private sector, I'm sure as well. But in addition, what we're finding is within the public sector, the ability for staff to actually be able to come off duty to go and take care of their mental health needs becomes limited by the urgency of the situation. And also, one may find that in terms of staff health services, they're not always geared to actually focus on workers' mental health per se. So we are prioritizing the public health system for now to make sure that our public health front and healthcare workers can actually address this issue.
So did I understand you well, you saying that you have extended this program to Port Elizabeth?
Yes.
You know, Port Elizabeth, if you look at the load of people who already are infected in the Eastern Cape province, it seems PE has quite a number of people, and Doranginza Hospital, to be more specific, is the one that you know, seems to already be at the point where people are handling these cases. So what are you hearing from them, since some of them have already underwent, you know, the training that you guys did you know, provided to them?
Okay, thank you for that question. I think you are correct. Actually, if you look at the numbers across the Eastern Cape, Port Elizabeth has got the highest numbers. And as you correctly have identified, some of the people who have tested positive have a link or connection to Doranginza Hospital. So for that reason, it then became quite urgent to make sure that there's this kind of support. But I must also emphasize that the team at the mental health unit in Dora were already willing to actually take this on, because they also recognize that we've got limited resources. So if we want to support frontline workers, it's going to be difficult to try and do it on an individual basis. Yes, one can actually refer one to the online resources, but for us, I think the most important thing was the fact that the teams themselves, not just looking at individuals, but the team who was supposed to be launching this defense against COVID-19 outbreak were not necessarily ready, not psychologically anyway.
Yes.
And the fear was that if we focus on just the individual, instead of actually taking the whole team into context, one may not necessarily be able to fortify the whole team to say, are you now mentally ready to take this on? So,
Yes.
you know, between the teams in Mthatha and Doranginza Hospital in Port Elizabeth, we have actually then managed to come up with something that seems to be benefiting whoever then comes for the training, in the sense that their feedback is always positive.
Yes, and how you know, how are the people, you know, the various sectors of the healthcare profession, you know, welcoming this intervention?
Thank you for that question. We are actually finding that in the beginning, a lot of people are not necessarily even conscious of this need. We are so used to working under pressure that we actually don't recognize the need in ourselves to say, hey, I actually need to bolster myself mentally and psychologically to do this. So what we are finding is that people are realizing that in retrospect. So for example, when there's a case in the hospital, then you find that people are saying, hi, I need to do something mentally, I feel I'm not right. But again, the emphasis is on this. When the people come to attend, there is no specific disorder that has been diagnosed. Yes. We are not targeting specific disorders. We are not treating a condition. All we're saying is come to us. We will help to support you so that you can find and strengthen your own reserves in order to actually cope with what is happening. So I think the key of that message is actually resonated with a lot of people. Then said, I definitely want to come and do this because I would like to fortify myself psychologically or mentally. I would like to prepare myself so that when this thing comes, I at least am able to approach it with a calm head.
Yes. Now, I'm just thinking, you know, something related to my earlier question on scalability. You know, there is the trainer type of, you know, way of scaling up where maybe, let's say, in each region, or, you know, there's like one person who comes who can actually, you know, then, you know, train people within their region. Is there something like that that maybe you are considering as a way of ensuring that, because you are a very busy person, you can't do what you have to do and still be able to train everywhere? Yes, I heard you about the online thing, but in the meantime, some train the trainer type of program, maybe half a day thing, so that they can then go and multiply, you know, to deliver what they have been taught, you know, by yourself and whoever else that you are working with.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. I literally actually had to undertake exactly such an initiative in starting out this psychological preparedness training program, because we literally had to start with our own team to say, okay, you've got the idea. You've spoken to your deputy, you put your heads together and you come up with this program. Now you have to communicate it to the team so that they've got the buy-in, as I mentioned before. But more importantly, you actually need to prepare the team so that they are aware exactly where we are going, why we are going there, and how we're going to get there. So what I found is if I had to now compute that into hours, I would say maybe 1 hour where one does a preparation of where this program comes from. The second hour would be to train the team in literally practicing the training on themselves, which I find is very useful, by the way, because what we have learned, it has done. If you look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we've actually been able to establish 7 mini teams that each individually can actually do this. So what we found is for each team, we have basically insisted that before you go and apply this to other teams, first apply it to yourself. And what has been useful is that even those who were scared or who were panicky or who were anxious within our team have managed to actually bring their, very confused and, collated fears together into a well-directed machine that says, yes, I've identified what the fears are. I've seen how the fears may limit me. This is what I could do to actually reverse that. And after we then did that, it was then possible for the same teams to go and train others. So the train the trainer idea is actually something we could not have managed this whole initiative without starting with that. So literally after doing it here in Umtata, the next was to literally train the team in Port Elizabeth. I think my biggest advantage with the teams that I'm talking about that we were able to establish is the fact that I trained or worked with all of the members of the different teams.
So these are the people who actually pass through, your hands, literally, in terms of training, coaching, mentoring, and so you already have the relationships, with them.
And I think that was an advantage because not only did I have strong relationships with them, but I also had, I would say insight into what level of knowledge they had or they have when it comes to mental health skills, when it comes to psychotherapeutic skills. Because as I said, despite the fact that we are not, delivering this as a psychotherapeutic intervention, the most important thing is you still require those skills. So it was easy then for me to design a train the trainer program for the teams because I knew exactly what they were coming from. And I would then say in future, what I have realized is that in order to do this, you need to at least have some experience in mental health, because that then also means that you have some psychotherapeutic skills that you can access. Even if they're not very complicated, depending on which level you work at. But secondly, you know how to read a situation, you know how to read a room, you know how to actually, use the feedback you get from verbal and non-verbal communication to then guide what you do with the group. So that is the most important skill for any facilitator who will then be working in delivering this training. The second one would be to get a very good idea of what exactly the training entails, and then to be able to observe as we then do the training and to be able to practice. So see one, teach one as well, because after that, you're expected to teach others.
Yes. Now, Doc, let's say another university or another province, because I understand you running this program in partnership with the Eastern Cape Department of Health. Am I right? Yes.
Yes.
So
we launched it as the Nelson Mandela Central Hospital, which is obviously working or part of the Eastern Cape Department.
Yes. So if then, based on the success that you already have achieved, if somebody then approaches, another province or even another university approaches you to say, we would like to, get training as well so that we can roll it out in our own areas? Is it something that you would be open to facilitating?
But look, this is a pandemic. It's a crisis. So I am very much of the opinion that anything that anybody finds helpful, as long as it is grounded in solid academic or scientific, research or basis, we actually need to be prepared to share resources. And the more we can share resources that help everybody to actually fight and beat this thing, the better. So from my side, I'm saying it's working for us because we are in the Eastern Cape, we've got these specific limitations, and therefore this is the best way we are finding we can actually support our frontline health workers. So if anybody else wants to join this particular, approach, anybody is more than welcome. So from our side, all I'm saying is that in the beginning, because we were not sure if it was going to work, we have been cautious. But the positive feedback we're getting is basically saying we're on the right track. We should actually continue and then make it, a bigger and bigger audience until most of our frontline feel that they can actually deal with this.
All right. Are you, and this one is just a side issue, are you in any way thinking about a possibility that post-COVID, somebody can actually, present a paper on this? Because look, this is an innovation. This is an innovation that was necessitated by unique circumstances that you were facing. And rather than sitting and waiting for a solution from somewhere, you applied your mind, you looked at what the world is offering, and you didn't find anything, from the world. And then you decided, well, I will develop something. I will have this program. You have now implemented it and it's working. So, yesterday here in Gauteng, a group of doctors, they actually had designed some what they call IncuBox, a way of assisting doctors not to get infected as they intubate patients who need to be put on respirators and all of that. And that was necessitated by the need, because the doctors obviously don't want to be infected, but at the same time, they need to do the intubations. And that brought an innovation. And I see what you have done from the area of mental health for the essential workers in the same vein, that this is an innovation. It's something that at the end, a master's thingy or a PhD thing can come out of, what you're doing.
I like your thinking, Dr. Nyathi. So what we are doing is, if you remember, I had said that we're busy auditing it. So we are learning as we go along. So based on what we are finding in terms of feedback from the attendees, we are constantly adapting and amending, but keeping the core recipe still reasonably loyal to the original idea. But one of the things that we actually intend to do is we also intend to write it up, obviously with the permission of the trainers, or rather the attendees who have willingly shared their experience in order to learn. And we definitely do intend to share as much of this information as possible, because this may not necessarily be our last health crisis. There could be others, and it is important for us to actually have an ability to respond and respond quickly to any health crisis that threatens our health systems.
Now, I just want to ask last two controversial questions. And it's up to you if you really want to answer, but I would love you to just give, try and answer them for me. Now, I work in the space of employee health and wellness, in the occupational health space. Now, employers have got an obligation to provide a safe and healthy work environment for their employees. And that therefore also includes a provision of PPEs, personal protective equipment, to their essential workers as they go and provide the professional services to the patients. We now are in a situation well, anyway, it's a global situation where there is a serious shortage of those PPEs to an extent that in other places, people have to repeat using the same mask or the same this or same that. Things are not ideal. But yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, there were some professionals in PE who were protesting and even considering to stop work if the employer is not providing the PPEs. So I know it's not psychiatry, but it's related to the anxiety that people have about contracting the infection whilst on duty. So I just want your take on that. People have taken an oath to save lives and all of that, but at the same time, the employers got an obligation to make sure that as they do so, they are protected. So what happens in a situation like this?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. Actually, this is one of the recurring themes that we come across when we do the training, when we are looking at realistic, or rather when we're looking at fears, thoughts, and feelings about the crisis. Yeah. And we are saying realistic in the sense that where you are working, you may actually find that you don't necessarily have access to PPE. I can also confirm that since that incident yesterday, our own Eastern Cape Department of Health has actually released a statement where they have given a commitment to say all healthcare workers at the front line will actually receive PPE. And there was also a recognition that their communication about this may not necessarily have been carried through. So yes. How we have literally handled it in the trainings is, remember, our focus is on teams. So we always ask the attendees to say, you are working in a team. Let this not be a problem that sits on your shoulders. It must be a team discussion and a team decision. If the team feels the level of risk that they are at is so high that if they walk in without PPE, it may result in most of them getting infected, then clearly the role the team plays there stops being a supportive and preventative one. It becomes one that actually perpetuates the spread of the infection. So our advice on that is to be very clear to say, let it be a team decision. Let the team sit down and look at the risks and at the advantages of actually working with PPE versus working without PPE, and let the team take a conscious decision to say, in this team, because of ABC, this is the decision we've taken. Then it stops being an individual decision. It becomes the decision of the whole team. So if you look, for example, at what has happened, in terms of the example you were giving in Dora, yes, if you look at the fact that it's a crisis, we all have taken an oath to say, first, do no harm, you shall be there for your patient. And if you then liken it to a war where the enemy is a virus, instead of soldiers as a front line, the country has us as healthcare workers. So you are the first line of defense, but you are also the last line of defense. Yes. So therefore, it does become a question of examining your own thoughts and feelings about the oath you have taken. It becomes a question of examining where you are. You may actually have very little choice because you might find that you've got an elderly relative at home that you are worried about infecting, which then may make it different to another person who necessarily does not have an older relative, may be living alone, but they may be worried about other considerations. So as much as it does become an individual decision, but my advice is do not take that decision alone. Let it be part of a team discussion and a team decision so that the whole team then moves with you.
Yes. The last one, what we've seen elsewhere, it has not yet happened here in South Africa, but what we have seen is a situation where at some point, and God help that we don't get there, at some point, the health services are so stretched. The need for ventilators and things like those, is so high. And then the essential workers, at ICU and all of those places, they now need to sort of play God that by rationing the services. and having to decide who gets put into a ventilator, who should not. In Italy, they took a decision that people from this age upwards, we are not going to put them on ventilators. We would rather give it to younger people. Now, that kind of decision, whilst it's understandable from a rationing point of view, but what does it do, at an emotional level to a doctor who knows if there were enough ventilators, I could have saved that 79-year-old as well. So I'm just saying the decisions that the frontline healthcare workers are going to be faced to take because of limited resources, and the guilt that might come thereafter, because they had to make a tough decision. Like any other war, you look at who is hopeless, I can't waste resources there, who needs to be saved immediately, and who can be saved a little bit later, even in this case. So those kind of decisions of life and death, do you foresee any long-term repercussions at a mental level, from the frontline people, nurses, doctors in the ICUs and high care and all of that?
Oh, thank you for that question. Also a very important question, because it already carries implications for the mental health burden that healthcare workers at the front line of this war are going to be carrying. If you look at the province, or work coming from the province that was highly affected by this outbreak, you are already seeing preliminary studies which reveal that more than 1,200 healthcare workers who were surveyed from that province, most of them from Wuhan.
Yes.
It was found that up to half of them had mental distress, depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, substance-related problems. So already we are seeing preliminary figures that say up to half of the health workers who are pushed to the front line of the school will actually, or may actually, end up with mental health sequelae, which is why it is therefore important for me, from where I'm sitting, and for the rest of my team, where we are, to say, what can we do to try and see if we can maximize the coping skills of people going into the crisis before the numbers escalate. We may be lucky and the numbers never get to escalate, but if they do, what can we do from our side to try and assist and make sure that people feel ready to face this thing? As much as we are now busy with the psychological preparedness training, we also have a second leg that we've got planned. And the second leg is basically based on the same premise as the first one. And that is to say, should we find an increasing mental health burden within the healthcare workers at the front line, how do we then respond to continue supporting them? And as much as we have then done this initiative, which is mainly a group intervention, the only way we'll actually be able to cope is to continue with group interventions, because the number of people who will be affected will just be too overwhelming for us to take on people individually. So in thinking all of this, we are basically saying, not only are we getting to a point where we're trying to prepare our frontline workers, but we also want to be able to launch the same kind of support, but focusing on different aspects should they then run into crisis if the numbers surge.
No, I'm happy to hear that it's not about the now, but also the aftermath, of when we are at a point where we are saying the pandemic has passed, but there are some wounded soldiers who will need to be supported for some time as a result of what they were exposed to during the war.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. As you're sitting talking, I'm also going back to the question you were asking about the pragmatic ethics that people have to end up taking. Because, ethically, all of us want to save everyone. That's the oath we took. But if you then get faced with a situation where you have to choose between person A and person B, the one way that I think a lot of us at that kind of frontline should be doing is we should be saying, are there guidelines that assist the whole team to actually agree on this decision? If there aren't, it's time to actually develop them. If you find that it's too much to try and develop them on your own, try and look and see what sort of guidelines they applied in Italy, what sort of guidelines they applied in the US, what sort of guidelines have they applied in China. Try and bring them back to your own situation and say, can these work? If these can't work, what is the impediment? And what can we do to try and amend them for our situation? Again, what I stress is people have to remember, this is not your war. All of us are soldiers in the war. You must do it as a team, and you must also make sure that the responsibility is carried by the whole team.
It's a shared responsibility,
Yes.
Yes. Because otherwise, if it's individualized, then people will then make it personal when things don't go right, and that could actually, affect them in the long run. What closing remarks would you like to give or messages to the frontline people out there who are working very hard as others are locked in their homes?
Thank you for that opportunity, Dr. Nyati. I think from my side, what I've found has been working when discussing with the different healthcare workers who are at the front lines is we liken this. I mean, many people have likened it to a war. When there's a war, you sleep in your own bedroom in comfort, knowing there's a soldier out there with a gun or other equipment to try and fight the war on your behalf and keep your country safe. In this instance, the enemy is one, it's the virus, and the people who are the actual soldiers are you and me as healthcare workers. We could take the option of staying at home, withdrawing from the war. But if you look at your neighbor who's not a healthcare worker, you look at whoever else is not a healthcare worker, and you compare to your skills, the best person who can actually stand up and fight for the country is you, because you already have training. So what is important here is, despite our limitations, despite the resource limitations, despite all the challenges we're facing, I think it is important to remember that if you look at what the country needs to do to win this war, you are the first line of defense, you are the last line of defense. And we are all in this together.
All right. So basically, you are encouraging our healthcare, or essential healthcare workers, because it's not just the doctors and the nurses and the psychologists, but it's a bigger team. Even the guy who's a porter out there, you are basically encouraging them to do the best they can, under the circumstances. I mean, sometimes when we look at just South Africa, we think things are bad, but to hear from other countries, first world countries, that actually the same problems that we're experiencing are also being experienced in the UK, in the US. They're struggling with the same challenge of PPEs. So we are not alone, but yes, we need to do our best to try and help the country to win the war. So Doc, I want to thank you for giving us time. I know you're very busy. Before this interview, you had to do a lot of training. And so from that training straight to an interview, that's not easy. However, that's the commitment that you have given. That's the sacrifice that you are giving for greater good of South Africa. So I want to thank you for your time. And I want to thank the people that you have trained. I know you've tagged a number of them so that they can follow this discussion. I want to thank them, because without them, you wouldn't be able to achieve some of the things that you have achieved as you prepare people for this war. So I thank you, I thank your team, and I thank the viewers for patience. My apologies for the technical, challenge that we had, but at least we still managed to make sure that everything we wanted to discuss, we are able to discuss during this hour and maybe 10 more minutes. So thank you very much for listening. And thank you, Prof. Zingela. May you continue doing the good work. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you and goodbye.
All right.